The slap echoed across an empty parking lot on a Thursday afternoon in October. Sharp, flat. The kind of sound that didn't belong in a school. The kind that made three students freeze mid-step and reach for their phones without knowing why. The girl who had been hit didn't scream. Didn't tamprana. She just stood there, very still, for exactly 3 seconds. And that stillness, that specific, unnatural calm, was the thing that should have warned him. Because here is what Brandon Hale didn't know when he raised his hand that afternoon. What no one at Westbrook High knew. The girl with the rust-red hand wraps at the bottom of her backpack had made sure no one knew. She had been waiting for this moment, not looking for it, not wanting it, but ready for it. 3 seconds. Then she turned around, and everything changed. The hand wraps were red once. 8 years ago, when her father first wound them around her 9-year-old fists and said, "Never start it, but always be ready to finish it." She'd carried them through 6 schools in 4 years. Different cities, different hallways. Same smell of floor wax and institutional anxiety. She was hoping she wouldn't need them at the 7th. She was wrong about that. But that part comes later. Zara Collins pushed through the front doors of Westbrook High on a Tuesday morning in October and did what she always did in the first 5 minutes of a new school. She stopped just inside the doors, out of the flow of traffic, and she watched, not dramatically, not in a way anyone would notice. She was just a girl with a backpack, apparently reading something on her phone. But she wasn't reading anything. She was mapping. Which hallway moved fastest? Which cluster of students occupied which corner? Where the teachers stood and where they didn't? Where the cameras pointed and where the shadows were? She had learned this system across 5 previous schools. It took about 4 minutes. By the time she started walking toward her locker, she already knew more about Westbrook High than most students who had been there for a month. This was not a skill she was proud of. It was a skill she had needed. 3rd hallway, left side. Locker 247. She'd memorized the map they emailed her mother. She'd memorized a lot of things before she set foot inside. She opened the locker, stacked her books in the order she'd need them, closed it, walked to first period without making eye contact with anyone, which was easier than people thought if you kept your gaze at mid-distance and moved with enough purpose that no one felt invited to interrupt. Rule 1, don't be interesting. Rule 2, don't make a contact until you know what it means. Rule 3, wait. Always wait. Find the shape of a place before you try to move through it. She'd broken Rule 3 once. Sophomore year, 2nd school. She'd moved too fast, trusted too early, and paid for it in a way that took her the rest of that year to recover from. She wouldn't make that mistake again. In the bottom of her backpack, wrapped in a clean cloth, were her hand wraps. Red, faded to rust at the knuckles from 8 years of contact with the heavy bag in the garage at home. She didn't take them out. She didn't need to. She just knew they were there. She met Mateo Rios on day 5. Not through any social maneuvering. Just proximity and the particular accident of 2 people who had both learned to eat lunch in libraries. She came in at 12:15. Her usual table, back corner, wall behind her, sightline to the door, was taken. She took the one adjacent, sat down, opened her chemistry notes. There was a boy across the table she hadn't seen before, which was unusual because she had cataloged most of the visible students by day 3. He was drawing, not in a notebook, on the inside back cover of a textbook that almost certainly belonged to someone else. The drawing was angular, dark, a figure facing something large and undefined, back to the viewer, shoulders set in the particular way of someone who had decided to stop running. She looked at it for a moment. "Yours?" she said, meaning the drawing. He surfaced from wherever he'd been. Took a second to locate her. "Yeah, it's good, that was all." She went back to her notes. He went back to drawing. They sat in silence for 20 minutes. It was, she noticed, comfortable. The kind of comfortable that was rare with new people. The kind that didn't require either of them to perform. When the bell rang, he closed the textbook and stood up. "Mateo," he said. Just his name. No performance attached. "Zara," she said. He nodded, left. She looked at the table where he'd been. He'd left a small pressure mark in the wood from drawing too hard. Not on purpose. Just the force of it. She thought about the drawing, the figure with its back to something it had decided to face, more than once that afternoon. She found out about Priya by accident. She was taking the long way to the library, past the side parking lot, which added 4 minutes but which was empty, and required no management of her face. Far corner of the lot, silver sedan, engine off, and in the passenger seat, a girl she recognized from AP English. Pioneer, eating from a container balanced on her knees because a phone in the other hand, alone, in a car, at lunch. Zara stopped. Priya hadn't seen her. She was scrolling through something, fork moving on autopilot. Zara had seen her in AP English on Monday. She'd answered a question about Fitzgerald that was so precisely correct the teacher had paused before responding. Priya was clearly, visibly intelligent. The kind of intelligence that occupied space even when the person tried to take up none. She also, Zara now realized, had never once appeared in the cafeteria. Not a coincidence. She kept walking, didn't knock, didn't do anything yet, but she filed it, the way she filed everything. Pioneer, AP English, eats lunch an hour, has been doing it long enough that it looks like routine. The first time Brandon Hale actually spoke to her was day 8, chemistry. She'd been assigned a lab table near the back. The teacher, Mr. Aldous, the particular tired energy of someone who had explained the eyewash station more times than he cared to count, was going through safety protocols. Brandon sat at the table next to hers. Not his usual table. She'd already mapped his usual table, front left quadrant, with the 3 people who were always within 5 feet of him. He chose a different one. She knew he'd crossed the room before he spoke. She had been aware of him moving the way you were aware of temperature change. "You must be the new girl," he said. Easy, conversational. The ease of someone who had never had a social interaction not go the direction they wanted. She didn't look up from her notebook. Collins, Zara Branton. A pause like he expected something to fill it. "How do you like Westbrook so far?" "It's a school." "Yeah." Another pause. "You're from Columbus, right?" "What brings you here?" "My mother's job." "What does she?" "Mr. Aldous seems very committed to that eyewash station," she said. Brandon blinked, then laughed. Short. And that was the thing she noticed. Not performed, not calculated, actually amused. He said, Same energy. Does anyone ever actually use it?" Danny Flores did sophomore year. Got acid in his eye during a titration. Did it help? He still has the eye, so she almost smiled. She caught it, but he saw the almost, and he filed it the same way she filed things, efficiently, without show. That was when she understood. He was paying attention. Not to the room, not to the social temperature. To her. She looked back at her notebook. That was a problem. Before she could figure out what kind of problem, day 12 arrived with a shift she felt before she could name. The hallway was the same. The people were the same. But something in the arrangement of them had changed by about 2 degrees. A junior who had been friendly enough on day 4 now found other places to look. The girl in AP English who had smiled at her the first week was suddenly sitting 3 seats away. The seat next to her in chemistry, technically nobody's seat, first come first claimed, kept ending up empty. Nothing you could point to. Nothing you could report. Just a gentle, consistent rearrangement of the social space around her. Like furniture moved half an inch. Not enough to trip. Enough to make the room feel different. She recognized it. She had seen the version of it that was rougher and more obvious in previous schools. This was the sophisticated version. The version deployed by someone who was smart enough to make it look like weather. She went to see Counselor Harmon on day 14. Not because she expected it to work. Because she needed to know exactly what the wall looked like. Harmon's office had motivational posters. Your story isn't over. Believe in the power of you. The particular cheerfulness of someone who had learned to be professionally encouraging without being personally invested. Zara sat down, laid it out, specific dates, specific instances. She had written them down. She put the paper on the desk. Harmon tilted her head to the right. A tick, Zara noted, and said, "This all sounds like very normal social adjustment, sweetheart. High school is fluid. Brandon Hale is a wonderful student. His family has done so much for this school. I'd like there to be a record," Zara said. "I can make a note. But I want to be honest. Brandon's father is on the district board. Making a formal thing of this when there's nothing concrete might not." "Thank you for your time," Zara said. She stood up, took her paper back, folded it, put it in her pocket. Harmon looked startled. "We can keep talking." "No," Zara said. "We're done." She walked out, closed the door, stood in the hallway. She had done the right thing first. She had tried the right way. She had the paper in her pocket and the date in her notebook, and the record of Harmon's non-response. Now she knew the shape of the wall. That night she called her father. "I went to the guidance counselor today." James Collins had the voice of someone trained out of small talk. A pause, and then, "What did she say?" "She said Brandon Hale's dad is on the district board." It was quiet. She could hear him in the garage. That particular stillness of someone standing near the heavy bag with their arms loose at their sides. "Zara, I know, are you sure yet?" She thought about the hallway, about the furniture moved half an inch, about Harmon's tilted head. "Not yet," she said. "Then you wait." "Okay, I'm proud of you for going." Even knowing. She didn't answer that. Some things sat better in silence. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, baby girl." She hung up, opened her notebook, wrote down the date and what Harmon had said and what Harmon had not said. She underlined the part about the district board. Then she looked at the hand wraps on her nightstand, and she thought about patience, about shape, about knowing when something had become the thing you were waiting for it to become. Brandon escalated on day 17. Not dramatically. That was the sophisticated version of this, and he was smart enough to stay inside it. Just more direct language. Standing closer. The particular male entitlement that dressed itself as friendliness and expected to be received as such. He said things that were technically compliments and functionally otherwise. He said the word exotic twice in 4 days, with the smile that meant he thought it was an offering. She did not receive it as one. She also discovered through Mateo that the friendly girl from AP English had been told, by someone in Brandon's orbit, that Zara was difficult, that the junior who'd stopped making eye contact had heard she was trouble. The weather thing was intentional. She had known it was. Now she had confirmation. She found out about Everett through Mateo on a Thursday in the library. Mateo set down pencil and told her without drama. A junior named Everett Moss. Academic decathlon. First in his family to go to college. The scholarship had been within reach for 2 years, had been the point of everything. Brandon had found something out about Everett, something from sophomore year, something documented in his school file. And he had used it once, with exactly the economy of someone who understood leverage. One conversation, one implication. It didn't need to be said again. 43 Monday mornings since then. Everett's hands shaking when he delivered the homework. Brandon never acknowledging it. "That's blackmail," Zara said. "That's what it is," Mateo said. "Has Everett said anything to anyone?" "No. Because saying something means the personal thing gets out. And then maybe the scholarship goes away for a different reason." She sat with the shape of that. The elegance of it, in the way that truly terrible things were sometimes inelegant. The trap built so that moving in any direction tightened it. "What's the personal thing?" she asked. "Not mine to say. You'd have to ask Everett. Can you introduce us?" Mateo looked at her for a moment. Not evaluation exactly. More like he was deciding something about himself. "Give me a couple days," he said. She went looking for a Priya on a Friday. Not at school. At the public library on Clearwater Avenue. Neutral ground, no affiliations. She had a feeling Priya might be there on a Friday afternoon, and she was right. Priya was at a corner table, with 3 textbooks and headphones in, and the expression of someone who had gotten very good at occupying space efficiently. Zara sat down across from her without asking. Priya looked up, took out one earbud. "I'm not here to recruit you for anything," Zara said. "I just want to ask you something." A long pause. "What?" "How long have you been eating lunch in your mother's car?" Paya looked at her steadily. 7 months. "Okay." Zara put her hands flat on the table. "And before that?" "Before that I ate in the cafeteria, and someone made sure every person I tried to sit with had somewhere else to be within 3 days. The flatness of her voice was the voice of someone who had built it carefully over 7 months. "So I stopped trying." "That was a smart adaptation." Priya blinked. "What, given the options you had?" That was the intelligent response to an impossible situation. Another pause. Priya was looking at her like she was trying to locate the angle. "What do you want?" "Have you ever written anything down? Dates, specifics, what was said and when?" Very long pause. "Maybe," Priya said. "I'm not asking you to give it to me. I'm asking if it exists." "Why?" "Because what I'm trying to build needs more than my word. One person's experience can be dismissed as interpretation. 7 months of documented incidents across multiple people is something else." Priya looked at her hands. At the table. Then she pulled out her phone. I have a notes app, she said, going back to February. She handed Zora the phone. Zora scrolled through it, 7 months of entries, dates, times, specific language, the names of whoever else was present. Organized with the precision of someone who had originally planned to do something with it, and then found there was nowhere safe to take it. So it just kept adding, because stopping felt like surrender. This is good, Zara said. This is very good. I took it to Harmon in March, Priya said. She told me to examine whether I was contributing to people's responses to me. A pause. She said it very gently. Zara handed the phone back. I have put papers on my bedroom wall. Everything I've mapped so far. I want to add yours. And then what? I don't know yet. But the people who run situations like this one, they rely on all of us keeping our information separate, not knowing what the others know, not being able to see the whole shape. She looked at Priya. Your notes help me see the shape. Priya was quiet for a long moment. If I share this and nothing happens, I know it could be worse. So why should I? Zara thought about the true answer, not the comforting one. Because keeping true things hidden to protect yourself is a strategy, she said. But it doesn't feel like one. It feels like shame. The afternoon light came through the library windows and fell across the table between them. Priya said finally, very quiet. It does. She was 3 weeks into Westbrook when Brandon stopped being subtle. It was a Thursday afternoon in October when the light did that thing. Low, golden, warm-looking, and cold to the touch. She was walking to her car after a late quiz. The lot was mostly empty. 3 other cars, one of which was hers. Brandon was there with 3 others. Not accidental. She knew it wasn't accidental. He said things. She would not repeat them all, and some of them didn't need to be repeated because the category of them was clear enough. He had made calculations. He had decided that the quiet version wasn't working, and that a different kind of lesson was required. And he delivered it with the particular confidence of someone who had done this before and suffered no consequences. Then he hit her, open palm across the cheek, the sound carried across the empty lot. Sharp, flat, definitive. She stood still. 3 seconds. She had learned to count. 1. She let her eyes close and open. 2. She found her feet. 3. She turned around. What happened in the next 30 seconds was not dramatic in the sense of elaborate. It was the opposite of elaborate. 8 years of training in a discipline built around physics. Where the weight sat. Where joints bent. What happened to balance? When you changed the center of mass someone expected. Nothing wasted. Nothing performed. Just the specific trained economy of someone who had spent 8 years learning exactly this. Brandon went down first. Then the one on her left. The third had enough time to understand what was happening, but not enough time to do anything about it. She stood. Her chest was moving. The lot was very quiet. Around her phones, 3-4 of them, students who had been heading to their cars and stopped. Brandon was on the ground. Not unconscious. Trying to process what his body was telling him, which was something his mind had apparently never prepared him for. She looked at him, not with triumph, not with anything that clean. She thought about Mateo's drawings, about Priya's 7 months, about Everett's hands shaking on Monday mornings. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Security guards running. Heidios. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run. This was Westbrook High, and she was 17 years old, and she had done something that could not be undone. She had known that going in. That was the thing about being sure. Being sure didn't mean being free from what came after. I just meant the decision was made with clear eyes. The suspension letter arrived at 6:47 in the morning. Diane Collins read it standing at the kitchen counter. Had it twice, because the first time she thought she had missed something. She had not missed anything. 5 days. Farah Collins. Initiating physical violence, resulting in 1 concussion and multiple injuries. She set her phone down, picked up her coffee. Set that down too. James came in from the garage. He looked at her face and stopped moving. What? She handed him the phone. He read it, set it on the counter. Brandon Hale, Diane said, is still going to school today. Yes. While our daughter is suspended for defending herself. Yes. She drank her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. I know. She went to Harmon. She did the right thing first. She documented. I know, so how is she the one? Because the video starts at the wrong moment, he said. Quiet. The specific quiet of someone being very careful with something true. Someone made sure of that very quickly. Diane looked out the window. At the October morning doing its thing. Warm light, cold everything else. How long has this been happening, she said. Since she got there, she came to me. Her voice was very even. 2 weeks ago, she said the school had a problem. I told her to work through the proper channels. I told her to be patient, to not make waves before she'd found her footing. She stopped. I told her the system worked if you worked it right. He didn't tell her she wasn't wrong. It was one of the things she had always loved about him. Yes, he said. You were. She nodded once. So what do? We go to the meeting at 9, we listen. Then we figure out what comes next. Principal Mercer's office had certificates on the wall and a bowl of candy no one ever touched. He looked like a man who had not slept well, which Zara noted because it meant something had happened in the hours between the parking lot and this morning that had required him to stay awake about it. She sat between her parents, neither of them touching her, their presence on either side like something load-bearing. Mercer looked at his folder rather than Tatum. The footage we have shows Zara initiating physical contact with Brandon Hale and 3 other students, he said. Diane, where is the footage from before that? There were some technical issues with the camera system. James Collins laughed. Not warm. Mercer looked at him and immediately looked back at his folder. Suspension stands, he said. Any further incidents will result in. We heard you, James said. We'll be in touch. They stood, all 3, simultaneously without looking at each other. They walked out through reception, through the front doors, into the parking lot. Zara stood between her parents in the morning air. Technical issues, she said. Yeah, her father said, with the camera pointing directly at Brandon when he She looked at the school. At the banner above the doors was Brook High Excellence in Everything. Okay, she said. So we know what we're dealing with. Okay, her mother said. Okay, she looked at them both. I need to think. The 5 days felt like 2 things at once, punishment and preparation. Day 1, she organized everything she'd written since arriving. Chronological, then by category, taped it to her bedroom wall, stood back and looked at it. The shape of it was clearer now. Not a bully with a temper. A system. Multiple moving parts, some conscious, some just long habit, all coordinated around maintaining one person's comfort at the expense of everyone else's. That was harder, but it was also something she could map. Day 2, Matteo knocked on the front door. Diane let him in. He came upstairs and stood in the doorway and looked at the wall of papers without speaking for a moment. How long did that take, he said. Since yesterday morning. He looked more carefully, reading the connections she'd drawn. You mapped it, he said. There are still gaps, she pointed. Here, around the scholarship situation. I don't have enough detail. Everett, he said. Did you talk to him? Matteo picked up a pencil from her desk, turned it over. I tried. He's scared, not of getting hurt. Scared of losing the scholarship. His parents have been planning around that thing since he was a freshman. She looked at the gap in her wall. I'm not going to ask him to do something that costs him everything, she said. But if he wants to. People want things when they're angry, or when they feel like they're not alone. That's different from it being the right choice. Matteo looked at her. You sound like someone who's done this before. I've been in 5 other schools. Different shapes, same architecture. What happened in those? A pause. She looked at the wall. I left, she said, every time. I kept my head down and waited and left. And after I left, there was still someone like Priya, eating lunch somewhere no one would see her. Someone like you drawing in the back of someone else's textbook. Someone like Everett with his hand shaking on Monday mornings. She looked at Matteo. I can't leave this one the same way. Matteo put the pencil down. Then I want to help. Whatever you need. Day 4, Everett Moss called. She hadn't reached out. She had decided she wouldn't. She meant what she said. She wouldn't ask someone to pay a cost she couldn't measure. But he called anyway. She answered. Waited. Matteo said you mapped it, Everett said. The whole thing, as much as I could. Does mine fit? There's a gap where yours should be. I left it empty. Long silence. She heard a door close. The quiet of someone who'd found somewhere private. I have panic attacks, he said. Since sophomore year. That's what Brandon knows. I missed a month of school. My mom had to tell the administration. It's in my file. A pause. It was supposed to be private. How did he get it? I never figured that out. Everett. She kept her voice steady. A panic disorder is a medical history. It is nothing to be ashamed of. I know that. His voice was tight. Knowing it and feeling it are not the same thing. No. A long pause. Can I ask you something? He said. Yeah, why are you doing this? I've been here less than a month. You could take the suspension. Come back. Keep your head down. You're smart enough to get through the year. She looked at the wall. Because I've done that, she said. 5 times. And every time I left thinking, well, I survived. I kept my head down and I survived. And then I'd be somewhere else and I'd wonder about the people I left behind. Whether they were still eating lunch in their cars. Whether they were still shaking on Monday mornings. She stopped. I'm tired of surviving. I want something to actually change. Very long silence. I have to think, he said. Take your time. I'm not promising anything. I know. He hung up. She looked at the gap in her wall. And she got up and went to the kitchen and made tea she didn't particularly want and stood at the window and watched the backyard and waited for whatever came next. The morning of day 5, Coach Renata Osei came to the house. Diane let her in. She was a small woman with the posture of someone who had learned very precisely how much space she intended to occupy. She sat at the kitchen table with a manila envelope in front of her. Zara sat across from her. I've been at Westbrook for 7 years, Coach Osei said. In 7 years, I have documented 14 situations involving Brandon Hale and students he decided to target. I submitted formal reports for each one. I also kept copies because I had a feeling. She put her hand on the envelope. Every report was marked insufficient evidence and closed. By Mercer. Who knew about Glenn Hale, Zara said. Who knew about Glenn Hale? A pause. I want to be honest with you about something. I have a daughter at state school on partial scholarship. I have a mortgage. I submitted the reports and kept the copies, and told myself that was enough. The kitchen was quiet. It wasn't enough, she said. I know that. Zar looked at the envelope. Why now? Because you did something I wasn't brave enough to do. And you're 17, and you're about to go back into that building, without nearly enough backup. She slid the envelope across the table. And because I have been carrying this for 3 years, and I would very much like to put it down. Hara opened it. 14 reports, going back 4 years, detailed and specific, written in the careful language of someone who knew their documentation might someday need to hold weight. She set it on the table. Can I keep this? That's why I brought it. She looked up at Coach Osei. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Coach Osei said quietly. Thank me if it works. She went back to school on Monday. She had expected it to feel like something. The return, the re-entry, some cinematic crystallization of the moment she walked back through the doors. It didn't feel like that. It felt like walking into a building where the temperature had shifted 2 degrees. Nothing visible. Just a difference in how the air moved when she passed through it. Some of it was what she expected. The looks. Admiring and nervous and in the category of watching something they couldn't quite read. But some of it was different. A freshman girl caught her eye near the water fountain, held it for exactly 1 second, then nodded, barely visible, before looking at her shoes. A junior she'd never spoken to was walking on her side of the hallway, deliberately. Small things, like the weather Brandon had been making around her, except running the other direction. She filed it, kept walking. She didn't see Brandon until 3rd period. Coming around the same corner at the same moment. Almost walked into each other. His jaw had the set of someone who had spent 5 days being very angry and exhausted all available expressions of it. A bruise along his cheekbone, fading to yellow. A cut at the corner of his mouth, nearly healed. She had done that. She held the knowledge without triumph and without guilt. Both of those would have been a luxury. They looked at each other. Neither said anything. They moved past each other. That was all. Except it wasn't, and they both knew it wasn't, because Brandon Hale's sense of natural order ran deep and she had disrupted it publicly, and people like him, people who had never meaningfully encountered consequence, didn't absorb that and move on. She was waiting for the shape of what came next. She just couldn't see it yet. She found Adrian Voss through a friend of Diane's, who knew someone who knew someone. He was 29 and 4 years out of law school, and worked at a small firm that did civil rights work, and had read about the parking lot incident online. He came to the house on a Wednesday, sat at the kitchen table, opened a folder. What Glenn Hale may have done regarding the security footage could constitute destruction of evidence, he said. What Brandon did in the parking lot is assault. The pattern documented in Kochosi's reports is relevant to establishing systemic failure. He looked at Zara. None of this is simple, and I want to be straight with you. There's no version of this where you walk out without cost. This will be public and difficult, and there will be people who come after you personally. Can I show you something? Zara said. She took him a stare. He stood in front of the wall and read it for a long time. Then he pointed to the gap. What's this? Someone I haven't been able to reach yet. He looked at her. Let me tell you something about cases like this. They live or die on pattern. One incident is a bad day. A pattern is a system, and systems properly documented are very hard for institutional actors to dismiss. He turned back. You've built the pattern. With the gaps filled in, she said, it gets stronger. With the gaps filled in, he agreed, it becomes something. I want to do it, she said. No hesitation. He nodded, looked at the wall one more time. Then we start. Mateo called on a Thursday evening. His voice was doing something she hadn't heard from it before. Controlled, in the way of someone managing something that wanted to come out differently. Glenn Hale had lunch with someone from my father's company, he said. My dad came home wanting to know if I was involved in something at school. He wasn't worried about me being in trouble. He was worried about his job. She sat very still. Is his job okay? For now, a pause. Zara, I need to know there's an actual plan, not just documentation, something that ends somewhere real. We have a lawyer, she said. And what Glenn Hale just did with your father, that's not a school problem anymore. That might be actionable on its own. She paused. Mateo, I need you to tell your dad the truth. That makes things worse. Right now, he's scared of something he can't see. That's worse than being scared of something real. She stopped pacing. You've been carrying this alone for 2 years. Let him carry some of it. Long silence. Then, like stepping off a ledge she'd been standing on for a long time. Okay. 3 days after that, Everett called again. I want to testify, he said. No preamble. Everett, don't. She stopped. I've been thinking about it since you told me about the lawyer. About what you said. About surviving. A pause, and she could hear him being very deliberate. I've been doing everything to protect what my family wants for me. And it started to feel like I was protecting their dream by dismantling something in myself. And I can't keep doing that. His voice was quiet. Certain, I can't keep doing that. She looked at the wall, at the gap, at the space she'd left empty. Do you know, she said carefully, that panic attacks are a medical condition. That having documented treatment for them reflects nothing about your character. I know it, he said. I'm still learning to feel it. Okay, she said. Then we'll do both at the same time. She picked up the blue pen after she hung up, filled in the gap. The Thursday it finally broke open was not in anyone's plan. She had been walking to first period at 9:15, thinking about the meeting Adrian had scheduled, not thinking about Brandon at all, which in retrospect was the mistake, because the people you stopped accounting for were the people who surprised you. She heard it from the south hallway. Not one interaction, multiple. 3 locations, she understood in about 4 seconds from how the sound distributed itself. Simultaneous, which meant coordinated. She moved toward the nearest one, Priya, 4 of them this time. And something in Priya's face that was different from the controlled frozen things she'd seen before. Something closer to genuine fear. She moved through the people between without thinking about it. She put herself in the space. What happened after that, she would not be able to narrate cleanly because it wasn't clean. It was loud and wet from the sprinkler system. Someone triggered in the first 2 minutes. And it was the specific chaos of a situation that had gotten away from everyone, including the people who thought they'd engineered it. She did not start it. That statement was true and also insufficient. She was aware of her hands, of what they were doing, of the trained economy of motion that existed to make the space around her and the people near her survivable when other options ran out. The sprinklers came on. The fire alarm, the floor went wet, the sound enormous. She went down on one knee. Got back up. She found Priya against the wall and put herself between her and the rest of it. Then the police were there. She stood still, made herself entirely still. Zara Collins, she turned carefully. Glenn Hale was standing behind the officers, because he had known to wait outside. His eyes found her across the noise in overturned backpacks and someone's broken phone and shattered glass from a trophy case. Satisfied, that was the expression. Not angry, satisfied. She understood it immediately. This was the shape he'd been working toward. The chaos, the damage, her at the center of it. Not because he'd planned exactly this series of events, but because he had been creating conditions for exactly this result. For months, she had given him what he wanted. She had also, she thought, as the handcuffs closed, given him something he hadn't intended. Because Priya had been on her phone from the moment she'd cleared the nearest hallway, uploading. Because Matteo, she would find out later, had been time-stamping everything he witnessed from the moment he heard the alarm. Because some of the students with phones had pointed them at Brandon rather than at her. She didn't know any of that yet, but she would. James Collins was at the outer edge of the crowd, standing still, hands at his sides. She met his eyes through the noise. He didn't move toward her, didn't make it worse, just looked at her with the expression she had seen twice before. Both times in the garage, both times when she had done something that cost her, and done it anyway because it was right. I see you. I know what this cost. We will deal with what comes next. She was put in the back of a police car. Through the window, she could see Priya on the sidewalk, phone out, pressing buttons with the focused intensity of someone who had decided what to do and was doing it without hesitation. She could see Matteo finding the police car, their eyes meeting through glass. He put his hand up. Not a wave. Just. Present. Still here. The school building got smaller. She looked at her hands in the handcuffs. The hands that had been trained for 8 years. That had done what they knew how to do when nothing else was left. She thought about the wall of papers. About the gap filled in with blue pen. About 14 reports in a manila envelope and 7 months in a notes app. And a lawyer who had said this could be something. She thought about how winning and being right were not the same thing, and how the distance between the two was just the road you had to walk. She was at the beginning of it. She looked forward through the windshield. At the street opening ahead, she breathed, and she waited. The holding room smelled like floor cleaner, and the particular staleness of air that had absorbed too many difficult conversations and never been properly exchanged. Zara sat on a plastic chair and looked at her hands. The handcuffs were off. They'd removed them when they brought her inside. But she could still feel the specific weight of where they'd been. The memory that lived in skin before it reached the brain. The place on her left wrist where the metal had pressed slightly harder than the right. She thought, I should be scared right now. She wasn't, which was either clarity or what came after clarity exhausted itself. She genuinely couldn't determine which. The room was small. One table, 2 chairs. A window too high on the wall to see anything through except a rectangle of gray November sky. She had been sitting here for 23 minutes, which she knew because there was a clock on the wall. And she had been watching it the way you watched things, when you had nothing else to do with your attention. She thought about Priya, about whether the upload had gone through before anyone could interfere. She thought about Matteo, about whether his father was home yet. She thought about Everett, and whether he knew what had happened and what he would do with knowing. She thought about the gap in the wall of papers in her bedroom, the gap she had finally filled in with blue pen, and whether any of the things that gap represented would matter now. The door opened. James Collins walked in ahead of the officer, who was technically supposed to be escorting him. The officer looked at James Collins and made the quiet, professional calculation that some positions were not worth holding and stepped back. James sat down across from his daughter. They looked at each other. Mom, Zara said outside, one at a time. She's angry. A pause, which means fine, almost a smile. Zara caught it before it arrived. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The posture of a man who was about to say something true and was making physical space to say it properly. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay. Did you start it? Not accusatory. Just the actual question, asked the way he asked everything, directly, without the softening that would have made it easier to answer evasively. She thought about the real answer. The one that wasn't defensive and wasn't self-serving and was just what actually happened in that hallway. No, she said. But I was there, and I knew what I had been building toward, and I knew there was a chance it would end up looking like I had. He nodded, once, slowness. You asked for honest. He sat back. Adrian is outside. Matteo called him before the police cars pulled out of the school lot. Something moved through her chest. not quite surprise. Matteo had been building his own resolve for weeks. She had watched it happen in real time, in the library, in the way his posture had changed across a month of understanding what they were dealing with. But hearing it said out loud, that he had moved without being asked, that he had picked up the phone and called a lawyer, while she was still in the back of a police car, made something in her chest do a thing it wasn't entirely prepared for. Matteo, she said. He's been documenting everything he witnessed since the alarm went off. Time-stamped the whole sequence. And Priya? 38 seconds, James said, before anyone could interfere. Adrian has already seen it. She looked at the table, at the space between her hands. Dad, yeah, I made things worse before they got better. People paid costs I didn't intend for them to pay. Worse for who, he said, not unkind, precise. For you today in this room, yes. Worse for Priya Nair going forward. For whatever freshman Brandon was going to decide to target next. He looked at her steadily. You don't get to measure worse for everyone just because it's expensive for you right now. She was quiet. Also, he said, and something in his voice shifted slightly, toward something he didn't usually allow into his voice, something warm and also completely certain. You have a lawyer, and the 38 seconds Priya uploaded start, before the moment you moved. The 2 weeks before the hearing were the strangest 2 weeks of her life. Not the hardest, the strangest. Because they required a kind of patience she had not practiced before. Not the patience of keeping her head down, which she knew well, but the patience of having done everything she could do and having to wait for it to matter. Adrian Voss worked out of a small office on Maple Street. 3 desks, a whiteboard covered in diagrams she mostly understood, and a coffee maker that produced something that was coffee in the technical sense, and an act of optimism in every practical one. She came in on a Tuesday and sat across from him, and he laid out what they had. Coach Osei's 14 reports. Priya's notes app, 7 months, time-stamped, specific enough to constitute documentation rather than complaint. Matteo's record of the Thursday hallway. 3 additional students who had come forward through Adrian, quietly, after the arrest had made things public enough that coming forward felt less like stepping into traffic. The 38 seconds. And the text messages recovered from Brandon's phone from the evening before the Thursday incident, with specific reference to timing and coordination, and a note from Glenn Hale about making sure there was no footage. That last piece had come from a technician who had restored deleted content from a phone that had been briefly in evidence custody before anyone fully understood what they had. A technician had followed procedure. The procedure had produced something no one had anticipated. Here is what I want you to understand, Adrian said. He wasn't looking at his notes, he was looking at her. Our strongest argument is not that you did nothing. It's that you were a 17-year-old student who tried every legitimate channel available to her. The counselor, the documentation, the attempt to build an institutional record, and was failed by every single one. And that what happened on Thursday was the predictable result of a system that protected the wrong person for 2 years, while punishing every attempt to address it. Will that be enough, she said. I think so. I'm not going to promise you I'm certain, because I'm not. But I think so. He paused. We need the pattern to be visible, and the pattern needs voices. Everett, she said. He called me himself, before you asked him to. Adrian seemed to be looking for the exact words. He had very specific questions about what would be disclosed and how. I answered him honestly. He sat with it for a few minutes. Then another pause, a careful one. He said that living with having stayed quiet, in order to protect something that should never have required protecting, was not something he was willing to do. The office was quiet. Outside, Maple Street went about its ordinary afternoon, someone with groceries, a delivery truck double parked. The complete indifference of the world to what was being assembled in this small room above a dry cleaner. Then we go, she said. Oh, qualifier. No hesitation, he nodded. She didn't sleep well the night before the hearing. Not because she was afraid, or not only because of that. Mostly because she had done everything she could do and was left with nothing to do with her hands. And her hands had been moving towards something for a month, and suddenly stopping them felt like a betrayal of the momentum. She lay in her room and looked at the wall. The papers were still up. She hadn't taken them down. She had thought about it. The evidence was with Adrian now. The wall had served its purpose, but she couldn't quite bring herself to dismantle it. It felt like the record of something, not just of what Brandon had done, but of how she had decided to respond. The particular kind of response that chose accumulation over reaction, documentation over explosion. The long way around, because the long way was the one that might actually arrive somewhere. She looked at the gap, filled in now with blue ink, Everett's name in the center of it, with lines going outward to the specific incidents, the specific Mondays, the specific weight of 2 years of compliance, purchased through fear. She thought about her mother, 2 nights ago. The kitchen table, Diane Collins sitting across from her with her hands folded and her voice very even and saying, "I owe you an apology. Mom, let me say it." A breath, the breath of someone who had been rehearsing this. When you came to me 3 weeks after you started at Westbrook and told me the school had a problem, I told you to work through the proper channels. I told you the system worked if you worked it right. I told you to be patient, to give it time, to not make waves before you'd found your footing. She looked at her daughter steadily. I told you all of those things because I believed them. I have built my entire professional life on believing them. Zara looked at her mother. At the woman who had organized 6 school transfers with the same efficiency she brought to everything, who had always known the right form to fill out, and the right number to call, and the right sequence in which to do things. The system is working, Zara said. Sort of. We're going to a hearing, because you didn't wait for it to. Diane's voice was very quiet. I put my faith in process over my faith in you, and I'm sorry. The system isn't wrong, Zara said carefully. It just wasn't moving fast enough, and some people had made sure it wouldn't. I know that now. Diane reached across the table and covered her daughter's hands with both of hers. I'll be there tomorrow. We'll both be there. Now, in the dark, Zara turned on her side and looked at the hand wraps on her nightstand. Head faded to rust. 8 years of mornings, she thought about what her father had said, a long time ago, about sure. About waiting until you were sure. She had been sure. She was still sure. And being sure she was learning was not the same thing as being safe from consequence. It was just the thing that meant the consequences were ones you had chosen, rather than ones that had simply arrived. She closed her eyes. Somewhere before the alarm, she slept. The hearing room was smaller than she had imagined it. She had built it up in her mind into something with high ceilings and formal architecture, the kind of space that communicated the weight of what happened inside it. It was just a room, government furniture, fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly unwell, a long table at the front where Hearing Officer Calloway sat with 2 colleagues. Calloway was gray-haired and wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the particular steady energy of someone who had done this work long enough to not be impressed by performance in any direction. She looked at the room the way good referees looked at a field, comprehensively, without apparent favoritism, already looking for what people were going to try to get away with. Hara sat between Adrian Voss and James Collins. Diane was in the row directly behind her. She could feel her mother's presence at her back like something structural, the way a wall could make you feel safer just by existing. Across the room, Brandon at a table with his lawyer. Glenn Hale beside them in a suit that said money but not ostentation. The suit of someone who had learned long ago that the loudest displays of wealth were for people who still needed to prove it. His posture was composed. His hands were still. He had the manner of a man who had sat in rooms like this one and found them navigable. He looked at Zara when she came in. She looked back. Neither of them looked away first. They looked at each other for a moment that was not comfortable but was also not a contest. It was just 2 people who had been in opposition for weeks finally occupying the same room at the same time without anything between them. Then, in the same moment, they both looked toward the front of the room. She thought, well, here we are. Arthur came first. He wore a suit that fit him approximately. The suit of a man who wore suits infrequently enough that each one was slightly wrong in a different way. He answered questions with the careful manner of someone who had been coached and was adhering to the coaching with more focus than ease. Safe language. To the best of my recollection, the information available at the time suggested. Standard protocol indicated. Phrases that communicated caution rather than dishonesty, but that accomplished the same thing. He had, Zara noted, the particular quality of a man who was trying very hard not to say anything specific. Adrian stood up for cross-examination. Principal Mercer. His voice was unhurried. In the 2 academic years prior to Zara Collins enrolling at Westbrook High, how many formal incident reports involving Brandon Hale were submitted to your office? Arthur looked at his hands. I would need to review the specific records to give you an accurate. I have them here. Adrian held up the folder from Coach Osei. 14. Would you like to take a moment to confirm that number? A pause. No, 14 reports, filed by multiple students involving multiple documented interactions, all marked insufficient evidence and closed. Adrian set the folder down with a precision that was not dramatic but was also not accidental. Who made the determination that the evidence was insufficient in each case? The silence that followed was not long, but it had weight. Mercer said quietly. And prior to making those determinations, in any of those 14 cases, did you speak with Glenn Hale? Brandon's lawyer objected. Adrian rephrased. In the course of your tenure as principal of Westbrook High, did conversations with Glenn Hale ever involve individual students who had filed complaints against his son? The longest silence so far. Calloway looked at Mercer over her reading glasses. Please answer the question. Mercer looked at a point in the middle of the table. Not at anyone. Not at anything specific. At the place in the air where you looked when you had decided to tell the truth, and were in the last moment before you did it. Yes, he said, very quietly. They did. The room did not erupt. It wasn't that kind of room, and Calloway wasn't that kind of officer. But something shifted in the air. The hearing had been, until this month's moment, a procedural exercise. Now it had become something else. Farah looked at Glenn Hale. His expression had not changed. He was very good at his expression not changing. But his hands, which had been completely still on the table, had moved slightly. Just enough that if you were watching for it, you could see it. She had been watching for it. The morning break. 15 minutes. She stood in the hallway with Adrian and her parents, and held a cup of coffee she didn't particularly want, because having something to do with her hands was necessary. Mercer just confirmed the connection, Adrian said. Low, just for them. That's the foundation. Everything else builds on top of it. What's next? James said. Everett. He was down the hall. She could see him through a glass partition, sitting in the waiting area with his hands on his knees and a stillness that was not peace, but was something adjacent to it. The stillness of a decision already made. She had seen that stillness in her father before difficult things, and she recognized it now in Everett. She thought about going to him. She decided against it. Some things you needed to walk up to alone, not because no one was with you, but because the final steps had to be yours. She understood that better now than she had 3 weeks ago. Diane put her hand on Zara's shoulder. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Everett Moss walked to the witness stand like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had made a decision about what to do with it. He wore a dark button-down shirt. His hands were still, not rigidly, not with the stillness of suppression, but with the stillness of someone who had been through something in the past 2 weeks that reorganized him on the inside. He sat down, adjusted slightly, looked at the front of the room. Brandon's lawyer began. Gentle, measured questions designed to establish context, to create, without saying it directly, the impression of a student whose account should be heard through a particular kind of lens. Everett's history, his time at Westbrook, the challenges he had navigated. Everett answered each question clearly. Yes, no, that's accurate. That isn't quite right. He did not volunteer, and he did not elaborate, and he did not get defensive. Then Adrian stood up. Everett, he said. Not Mr., just his name. The small informality of someone signaling, I'm on your side in here. Can you tell us, in your own words, how you first came to complete homework assignments on behalf of Brandon Hale? And Everett told the truth. He told it the way it actually was. Not with the dramatic quality that the word destiny sometimes implied. Not with the cadence of someone performing for an audience, but with the specific texture of something that had been replayed so many times in his own mind that its contours were completely clear. He spoke at a pace that was slightly slower than conversation. He paused in the right places, not for effect, but because some of the places required a breath. Ha talked about sophomore year, about missing school, about the particular weight of having a true thing about yourself documented somewhere, and then discovering, gradually, and with a creeping horror, that someone had accessed it without your knowledge and was holding it. He talked about the first Monday morning, his hands shaking on the stairwell. Brandon's complete absence of acknowledgement when he took the assignment, like it was a transaction that didn't require Everett to be a person, like he was infrastructure rather than someone. He talked about 43 Monday mornings. He said the number quietly and precisely, and let it sit in the room. The room was very quiet. Then Everett said something that was not in any prepared statement Adrian had helped him organize. Something that came from somewhere underneath the organized truth. From the part of himself he had apparently decided, in the 2 hours he had spent sitting alone in the waiting area, could not be left out. "I want to say something," he said. Adrian nodded. "I have panic attacks, that's real. It's part of my life. It was part of my life before Brandon Hale knew about it, and it will be part of my life after." I looked at the front of the room, not at any one person, but at the shared space of it. The place where truth landed, when there was no specific target to direct it toward. For 2 years I let someone use that fact as a mechanism of control, and I want to be clear about what that cost, not just the assignments. A specific experience of walking through a school building every day, knowing that something true about you was being used against you. Knowing that the people who were supposed to handle it had been, a brief pause, arranged in a way that made handling it impossible. He took a breath. I kept copies of every assignment I did for him. I photographed each one before I turned it in. I didn't have a plan for what to do with them. I just couldn't stand the idea that it was happening, and there was no record, that if I ever needed to prove it, there would be nothing. Another breath. I want that on the record. That I always knew what was happening was real. That I kept the evidence because some part of me refused to let it be erased. Even when I was too scared to do anything else, I kept the evidence. Nobody in the room spoke. Calloway looked at him over her reading glasses for a long moment. The moment was long enough that it had its own weight. Then she made a note. "Thank you, Everett," she said. "You may step down." He stood, walked back, and as he passed the row where Zara sat, he didn't look at her, not because he was avoiding her, but because he was somewhere inside himself, processing what he had just done, and that was exactly where he needed to be. She understood that. The lunch break. 45 minutes. They ate in a conference room down the hall. Sandwiches Diane had produced from somewhere, because Diane had decided that practical was her contribution, and she was not going to be deterred from it. Nobody said much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because they had all arrived at the particular point in a long, difficult thing where words were more expensive than silence. Matteo was there, which she hadn't expected. He had driven himself, arrived during the morning session, sat in the public gallery and with the expression of someone who was filing everything. When they moved to the conference room for lunch, he came with them and sat at the end of the table and ate his sandwich and said, after a while, "Everett was good," Zara said. "Actually good, not just brave." "Good," she looked at him. "How are you doing?" He considered the question seriously. The way she had learned, he considered most things. "I talked to my dad. After you told me to, the night of the arrest. How did that go?" Hard, and then he stopped. He got angry, really angry, but at the right thing. Once he understood what had actually been happening, he was angry at the right thing. A pause. He called Glenn Hale's office the next morning, left a message, said he was aware of the lunch meeting and he was prepared to discuss it publicly. Did Hale respond? No, but my dad's boss called him into a meeting that afternoon and apologized. Matteo looked at his sandwich. Said there had been some external interference in a private matter, and the company wanted him to know they didn't condone it. Farah sat with that. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I wanted to wait until it was resolved." He shrugged, the specific shrug of someone who was trying to make something feel smaller than it is. "Also, I didn't want you to feel responsible. I am responsible. You didn't make Glenn Hale do that. He made that choice because he thought he could, and because no one had ever stopped him before." Matteo looked at her directly. "You just made it so someone finally pushed back." The afternoon session began at 1:15. Brandon Hale took the stand. His lawyer had argued against it. She learned later from Adrian. Glenn Hale had overruled him, which said something about the kind of man Glenn Hale was. The kind who believed confidence was always the better play, who had spent so long in rooms where his confidence was justified that he had lost the ability to accurately assess rooms where it might not be. Brandon walked to the stand with the ease of a person who had not yet fully understood that the ground had shifted. He sat down. He was composed. He was good-looking in the particular way that photography loved. He had been prepared, and he adhered to the preparation with the practiced manner of an athlete following a game plan. He told the version of events where he was a normal student who had tried to welcome a new classmate and encountered aggression he didn't understand. The version where Zara had arrived with a disposition toward conflict and had manufactured situations that supported it. The version where Thursday's hallway incident was not a planned ambush, but a misunderstanding that escalated because of Zara's documented tendency toward violence. I was, she thought, genuinely believable. Not because everything he said was fabricated. He had included enough true details that the false ones had true things to lean against. He was believable the way people were believable when they had partially convinced themselves. When the version they were telling was the version they had been telling themselves long enough that it had taken on the texture of memory. His lawyer sat down. Adrian stood up. He began small, conversational, built a rhythm before he changed it. Brandon, you said you tried to make Zara feel welcome when she first arrived at Westbrook. Is that accurate? Yes. You approached her in class, spoke to her in the hallway, invited her to social events. Yes. And she declined, yes. Multiple times, yes. And after she declined, repeatedly and clearly, you continued to approach her. I was trying to be friendly. After she had said no, she didn't say. She declined your invitations. She asked you to stop approaching her. She went to Counselor Harmon to report that your behavior was making her uncomfortable. Adrian paused. Is that not saying no? Silence. Brandon's jaw moved slightly. Something being managed. I thought she was playing hard to get, he said. And then, immediately, something in his expression changed. The awareness of having said the wrong thing, arriving just a fraction of a second too late to stop it. Adrian let it sit in the room, let it sit long enough that everyone present felt the full specific weight of those words. What they assumed, what they revealed, what they said about how Brandon Hale understood the concept of another person's refusal. Playing hard to get, Adrian said, completely neutral, as if he was simply confirming a weather report. He moved to the display screen without further comment. I'm going to show you text messages recovered from your phone. October 14th, 2 days before the parking lot incident. I read from the screen without drama, without theatrical emphasis. Just the words as they were. She doesn't know how things work here yet. We need to remind her. He looked up. Did you send that message? Brandon's throat moved. Yes. And the message immediately following. He read again. She needs to understand. Dad says just make sure nobody's recording. The room was very still. Brandon's lawyer was on his feet. The objection was overruled. Adrian moved on. He went through the pattern, methodically and without theater. The incidents from Coach Osie's reports, cross-referenced with Brandon's own account. The specific gaps between what Brandon claimed had happened and what 14 documented reports to describe. The timeline of the Thursday incident versus the version Brandon had presented. Each piece alone was manageable, addressable, something a good lawyer could work with. Together they were a structure, a shape, the shape of a system rather than a series of accidents. Brandon's answers got shorter. The ease was still there, but it was effortful now. He was working to maintain it, and the working showed. The prepared version was still technically available to him, but every answer he gave with it created a small inconsistency with something else. And the inconsistencies were accumulating. Then Adrian said, I want to ask you one more question. I'd like you to think about it before you answer. Brandon looked at him. In the 14 documented cases filed against you over the past 2 years, by students whose names you know, whose faces you see every day in that school, did you ever at any point consider that what you were doing to them was wrong? The silence that followed was the longest silence of the entire proceeding. Not because Brandon was thinking. She could see he wasn't thinking. Somewhere past thinking. Somewhere in the territory that was accessed when all the prepared material had been used. And what was underneath it was still there, waiting. He said the thing that came from underneath. They should have just worked with it, he said. His voice was not angry, not defensive, almost reasonable, in the way of someone self-describing what seemed to them self-evident. That's how it works. Some people have advantages, and some people don't. If they'd just worked with it, none of this would have happened. It wasn't complicated. He stopped. The room was not silent now in the way it had been silent before. It was silent in the way of many people collectively holding very still. Worked with it, Adrian said. I didn't mean. You meant precisely that, Adrian said, very quietly, not as an accusation, as an observation. And that is what this case has always been about. He sat down. Glenn Hale was very still. The composure was present, but it was costing something now. She could see that. Something underneath it that had been contained for a long time was pressing against the surface, and the containment was requiring active effort. He looked like a man who had just heard his son say out loud the thing that Glenn himself had believed his whole life and had always known was better left unsaid. Brandon's lawyer was leaning toward his client and speaking quietly. Brandon was not listening. He was looking at the table in front of him with the expression of someone who had just understood something about a room they were in. She did not feel victorious. She was clear-eyed enough to know that what she felt was something more complicated than that. The specific emotion of someone who has been trying to show people something true for a long time and has finally managed to make it visible and is now sitting with the cost of the effort rather than the satisfaction of the result. Paya's footage came last. Adrian played it during the evidentiary summary. 38 seconds on the screen at the front of the room. It began before anything else, before Zara moved, before the alarm. It showed the hallway in the natural light of a Thursday morning, and it showed the configurations of people in it, and it showed, specifically and without ambiguity, what was happening and to whom and who was directing it. It showed Brandon with his phone out, sending a text 12 seconds before the first push. It showed the coordination, the deliberateness. It showed clearly and from an angle no one had accounted for what the situation had been before Zara Collins walked into it. 38 seconds that Priya Nair had recorded while managing her own fear, uploaded immediately after she got clear, because she had decided in that moment, after 7 months of lunch after watching Zara get arrested, after Everett's phone call, after all of it, that she was not going to stay quiet to protect herself one more time. The footage ended. The room was very still. Calloway looked at it for a moment after it stopped, made a note, looked at both tables. We'll recess until 4:30, she said. They waited in the hallway. Darius Webb arrived at 3. He had driven himself. He sat across from Zara and said, I wanted him, she said. I know. And that was enough. Mateo sat next to her on the bench with his phone face down on his knee and said very little, which was exactly right. Freya was there, back straight, looking at something on her phone with the focus quiet of someone who had stopped performing calm and was simply feeling it. Diane distributed sandwiches again, from a bag she had apparently packed in anticipation of the wait, because Diane Collins had decided that practical was her contribution to this situation, and she was not going to be diverted from it. Ho Chosi stood slightly apart from the group, which felt correct. She had her own accounting to do. 7 years of reports. 7 years of copies in an envelope. 7 years of deciding that keeping her job was the thing she could afford to do, and that this was enough. It hadn't been enough, and she knew that, had known it for 3 years, and whatever happened in that hearing room would not fully resolve what she felt about the gap between what she had done and what she could have done, but it would be part of how she moved forward. Zara understood this about her, in the way you understood things about people who had made complicated choices and were still living with them. James sat beside his daughter. He didn't say much, but every 45 minutes or so he offered something small. The time, the weather outside the window, once a story about a training exercise that had gone wrong in a specific and darkly funny way. Not because it was relevant, because it was human, because it moved time forward, because being good at sitting with someone in difficulty was its own skill and he had it. At 6:47, they were called back. Calloway read from her notes for several minutes. The procedural language of official decisions, the architecture that built from foundation to conclusion, that established the ground before it stated what stood on it. Azara sat completely still, James on her left, Diane behind her. She thought I did what I could with what I had. she thought. Everett got on that stand. She thought. Priya uploaded 38 seconds. She thought. Mateo counted 43 Mondays and then called a lawyer. She thought. Coach OC kept 14 reports for 3 years, waiting for a moment that would make them matter. And then Calloway said it. All charges against Zara Collins dismissed. The room changed. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Like the actual thing, a pressure that had been so constant, she had stopped consciously registering it, suddenly absent. Her shoulders dropped approximately 1 inch. Her hands, which had been very still until opened slightly. Behind her, Diane made a sound. Small, controlled. The sound of someone who had been managing something for weeks, and was choosing this specific moment to stop managing it. Adrian put his hand briefly over hers on the table, acknowledging rather than celebrating. She looked at the front of the room, at Brandon, staring at the table, with the expression of someone whose mind had not yet delivered the information his body had already received. At Glenn Hale. And here was the thing she noticed, the thing she would remember. The composure was still present, but was costing him now in a way it hadn't cost him when he walked in. Something beneath it was moving. Something that looked, if you watched for long enough, like the specific bewilderment of a man encountering consequence for the first time. She did not feel triumphant. She had imagined sometimes that she would. That there would be a moment with the clean, satisfying weight of endings in books she had loved. All the accumulated pressure lifting at once into something that felt like resolution. Instead, she felt very tired and very grateful, and already aware that the next thing had started before this one was finished. And underneath all of those things, something else. Something that was harder to name. Something like the particular emotion of having been right about. Something that it cost a great deal to be right about. Not regret. Not exactly. But the specific sober quality of someone who has fought something true and arrived at truth, and found it weighs about what they expected it to weigh. Either more nor less. Calloway continued. Brandon's situation, Glenhill's, the referrals and investigations and requirements. She spoke for another 8 minutes. She was thorough. When she finished, she looked at the room over her reading glasses. We're adjourned, she said. Outside was November. Cold, clean, the sky doing what November skies did. A particular steel gray that looked severe and was somehow also peaceful. They stood on the steps. All of them. The configuration of people who had been through something together, and were in the last minutes of the version of themselves that existed before they knew how it turned out. Mateo was not crying, and no one was and was not particularly concerned about either state. Priya stood with her usual straight posture, but with something different underneath it. The posture was the same, but it was the real thing now, rather than the preformed thing. The difference between a wall that was being held up by effort and one that simply stood. Everett was quiet. Emptied out in the way that was not sad, but was what came after carrying something for 2 years, and finally setting it down. He would pick things up again. She could already see the shape of that in how he was standing. The specific quality of someone who was resting rather than ending. But right now he was simply standing in the November air, with nothing he was required to carry, and that was enough. Darius caught her eye. I'm going to get my scholarship back, he said. Not asking, not hoping. Deciding. I know, she said. And she did. Coach OC came and stood beside her for a moment. Didn't say anything right away. Just stood there. I'm going to do it differently, she said. Going forward, whatever it costs. I know that too, Zara said. Coach OC nodded once. Went back to her car. Adrian shook James's hand. Said something about next steps. James listened with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered. Diane said something to Adrian that Zara couldn't catch. But she heard him laugh. Genuinely, the sound of someone who doesn't laugh for effect laughing, because something actually struck him as funny. Zara stood on the steps. Looked at Maple Street, thought. So, now what? 4 months later, things were and were not resolved. The Glenn Hale investigation was ongoing. It moved slowly, the way official things did, through process, through the careful sequence of steps designed to make certain before it acted. But it moved. That was the thing she had to keep reminding herself. It moved. Mercer had resigned 2 weeks after the hearing. The school board was conducting its own review. The interim principal was a woman named Dr. Yoon, who had come in with a list and had started at the top. Coach OC was running a new process. At first unofficial, then increasingly formal, with Dr. Yoon's explicit support. Complaints were being read, followed up on, not closed with a rubber stamp and a phone call to a parent donor. Brandon was in a diversion program, a structured one with actual requirements and a completion timeline. Not what Zara would have designed if it had been hers to design. But it was real, and it had terms, and it was at minimum, not nothing. She thought about him sometimes. Not with anger. Anger had a half-life, and it had expired sometime around the hearing. Not with sympathy exactly, though maybe something adjacent to it. Mostly, she thought about the specific sentence he'd said on the stand. They should have just worked with it. And she thought about what it meant to grow up believing that, to have it confirmed at every turn, to never be placed in a situation where the world did not move around you. She did not excuse it, but she thought about it. Everett's original scholarship had been quietly reinstated after the hearing became public. I hadn't asked for that. It had simply happened. The committee making a correction they hadn't announced as a correction. Just suddenly finding the paperwork had been reviewed. She had learned about this through Mateo, who had learned through Everett, who had told her about it in the library on a Thursday afternoon, with the particular even tone of someone who had decided not to be surprised by good things, because that would make him too vulnerable to bad ones. I was also running something. Wednesdays, after school, the library. Students were dealing with anxiety, with depression, with the specific difficulty of managing those things in an environment not designed to accommodate them. He hadn't named it yet. He said he was still thinking about what to call it. But 12 students had come the first week, and 23 by the third, and the librarian had given them a room with a door that closed. Mateo went. Every week. He didn't tell Zara he was going. She found out through a reference he made in passing, the way you mentioned things that had become ordinary. Priya was eating in the cafeteria. She told Zara about this on a Tuesday with the casual delivery of a small fact about her current life. 7 months of lunch in a car, over. She said it the way you said things that you had decided to treat as normal, because treating them as significant gave them too much power over you. And Zara recognized that specific decision for what it was, and respected it without naming it. Darius was on the court. The scholarship situation was complicated. There were documents to correct, records to revise, a process. But the process was moving. He had a lawyer, a different one from Adrian, but one Adrian had recommended. He practiced every morning at 6 because that was what he did, and he was not going to stop doing it while he waited for bureaucracy to catch up with reality. She had gone to one of his games, not because basketball was something she particularly followed, just because she wanted to see him there. She saw him. He played the way he did everything, with his whole body, with total focus, with the specific concentrated energy of someone who understood that what they were doing mattered and was acting accordingly. That was enough. She found Everett in the library on a Thursday afternoon in February, not a Wednesday, just a regular afternoon. He was working on a problem set, pencil moving with the particular speed of someone for whom the work was genuinely interesting rather than obligatory. She sat down across from him. He looked up, nodded. They worked in silence for a while, the specific comfortable silence that existed between people who had been through something together and arrived at the version of each other that didn't require performance. After a while, he set down his pencil. I applied for something, he said. She looked up. There's a scholarship for students with documented mental health histories in STEM, specifically students who've experienced stigma. He was looking at the table. I found it 3 weeks ago. I almost didn't apply because I thought. He paused. I thought it would feel like I was making my history into a credential. Like I was using what happened to me as a resource. And then I thought, the alternative is to pretend it isn't part of who I am, which is exactly what I was doing for 2 years. Which was exactly the problem. He looked up, so I applied. She looked at him for a moment. Good, yeah. He picked up his pencil again. I would not have applied before the hearing, before you said it out loud. Before that, he paused. That was the most scared I've ever been. I know, and Altzy stopped. Found the right angle. After I stepped down and went back to my seat. That thing, that feeling, I don't have a word for it. Light, she said. He looked at her. Not happy light, just less heavy. Like something that had been pressing on your chest for so long you'd stopped feeling it separately from yourself. suddenly not there. He thought about it. Yeah, he said. Exactly like that. They went back to work. After another 20 minutes, he said, "What are you going to do after graduation?" She had been thinking about this. More than almost anything else. She had spent most of her life thinking tactically. The next school, the next situation to navigate, the next position to hold. Thinking past graduation felt like a different kind of muscle, one she was building in real time. Law, she said. Civil rights work. The specific kind that deals with institutional failures, schools, systems, bureaucracies that are supposed to protect people and have been arranged to protect other things instead. She looked at her notebook. I want to learn how to take those apart from the inside, with the right tools, not with my hands. Everett looked at her. Not Muay Thai, not Muay Thai. A pause. Muay Thai got me here. What I want to do next needs a different set of tools. He nodded slowly, filed it carefully. Your dad know? I told him last week. What did he say? She thought about the garage, the November evening light, the sound of the bag, her father's face. He said it made sense, she said. He said the goal was always the same. The method was just evolving. Everett looked at her for a moment, with an expression she couldn't quite name, but that felt like something he'd arrived at after a long time of looking for it. You should write that down somewhere, he said. The thing my dad said, the whole year, he said. What it was and what it cost and what it changed. Not for anyone else. Just he stopped. Found it. Just so you have it. So it doesn't disappear into the thing where hard years get compressed into the version that fits in a sentence. She thought about the wall of papers in her bedroom. Still up. She still hadn't taken it down. Maybe, she said. I think you should. She looked at him. Are you keeping one, a record? He smiled, very small. I kept 43 copies of homework assignments I should never have had to do. I think I have a record. That evening, home. She went into the garage. It was February and cold, and the garage held the cold the way concrete did. Not viciously, just completely, as a fact of its nature. She turned on the overhead light. The bag was in its corner, unchanged. The duct tape at the seam, the slight lean from years of impact on the right side. She had been hitting this bag since she was 9 years old. Through Columbus and every school after it. Through 6 different bedrooms in 6 different houses, this bag had always been eventually there. Her father had dismantled it and reassembled it in each new garage. With the same wordless efficiency, he broke to everything that mattered. She took the hand wraps from her jacket pocket, wound them around her hands. The fabric worn smooth where it always contacted the same places. The weight of them familiar in the way that only very old familiar things were, not noticed anymore, just present. Like a part of herself. She started slowly, finding the rhythm. It was not the rhythm of anger. She had noticed over the years that the time she came to the bag with anger, the sessions were always worse, faster but sloppier, more noise and less precision. The good shins, the ones she carried with her, were the ones where she came to it with something quieter, something that allowed the work to actually work. Tonight she came with something she didn't have a clean word for, tired. And grateful, and alert in a way she hadn't been in months. Not the hypervigilance of a situation she was managing, but the alertness of someone who had finished managing something, and was noticing what the world looked like from the other side of it. The door opened. James came in. He did not announce himself. He leaned against the far wall and watched the way he had watched since she was 9 years old, with a specific quality of attention that was not passive. He was watching and learning, and occasionally saw something useful. Was the only person whose watching she had never felt as pressure. She worked, he watched. She stopped, turned. Odd, yeah. She looked at her wrapped hands, then at him. Did I do the right thing? Not a rhetorical question. The actual question. Asked to the person she trusted to give her the true answer, even when the true answer was harder than the comfortable one. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of not knowing. The silence of someone being very careful with something that deserved care. You did the right thing in the parking lot, he said. You defended yourself when someone put their hands on you, after you'd tried every other option available to you. And the rest, he paused. Some of it was right. Some of it was the best available choice in a situation with no good choices. Some of it you'll be thinking about for a long time. That's not a clean answer. No, he agreed. It's not. It's the true one, though. He pushed off the wall, came closer, but not all the way. left her the space she needed. Here's what I know without qualification. You didn't run 6 schools, and you always ran. And that wasn't cowardice. Running was the right strategy when the cost of staying was yours alone to carry. When there was no one else who could share it, no way to make it matter beyond yourself, running was smart. That was what I would have done. She looked at him. This time the cost was shareable, he said. And the people who shared it, they made that choice. Everett didn't get on that stand because you told him to. He got on it because something you did made him believe his choice could change something. Priya didn't upload that footage because you asked her. She did it because watching you get arrested made her decide she was done being quiet. He stopped. You didn't make those choices for them. You made it possible for them to make those choices for themselves. That's different. And it's actually... He paused again. It's actually quite a lot. She breathed. I want to study law, she said. Civil rights. I want to learn the inside of the systems that made Westbrook possible. How they're built, where they're vulnerable. How to take them apart legally and permanently, rather than fighting them one parking lot at a time. She looked at her father. Muay Thai got me here. But the next part needs different tools. He looked at her for a long moment. Our grandmother told me something once, he said. She said there were 2 kinds of strength. The kind that stopped things from happening, and the kind that changed the conditions that made things possible. What did she think was more important? She said the first kind bought you time. The second kind bought you the future. He looked at his daughter. You've been building the second kind for a while now. You just had to go through the first kind to get there. She held that. He moved to the coaching position, slightly behind her, slightly to the side. The position he had always taken. The position that said, I'm here, I'm watching. I'm not going to do this for you. She turned to the bag. She threw a combination. Clean, economical, the kind that didn't announce itself. You're left, he said. I know. Fix it, she fixed it. She threw it again better. They stayed in the garage as the February dark came down fully outside, and the light in the air was warm and yellow, and the sound she was making was the same sound she had been making for 8 years. The same rhythm, the same contact, the same fundamental thing that had been constant through 6 schools and 7 moves, and one parking lot in October, and a holding room and a hearing room, and a November afternoon on a courthouse step. She threw the combination again. Her left didn't drop. Her father was quiet behind her, not leaving, not commenting, just there. The way he had always been there, which was the most important thing he had ever given her. Not the technique, not the training, but the simple fact of his presence as evidence that the world could contain people who stayed. She breathed. The bag swung and settled, swung and settled. She thought about Everett in the library saying you should write it down. She thought about the wall of papers in her bedroom, about the gap filled in with blue ink, about what it had taken to fill it and what had happened after. She thought about a girl who had arrived at Westbrook High on a Tuesday morning in October with one rule: don't be interesting, and had discovered, across the weeks that followed, that the rule had already been broken for her, that someone had decided she was interesting before she ever walked through the door, that the question was not whether she would be seen, but what she would do once she was. She thought about all of that. Then she stopped thinking and let her hands do what her hands knew how to do. The bag moved, the rhythm held. She breathed in, she began.